Boarding a luxury transatlantic flight should be a seamless experience, especially when sitting in a $5,000 first-class seat. However, for one passenger, it became a nightmare of racial profiling and blatant humiliation orchestrated by a power-tripping flight attendant. What this attendant didn't know was that the woman she was trying to illegally kick off the flight possessed enough authority to ground the entire aircraft with a single phone call. This is exactly how arrogant karma met a catastrophic end. John F. Kennedy International Airport Terminal 4 was a symphony of controlled chaos on a rainy Thursday evening. Inside the exclusive departure lounge, Naomi Harper sat quietly sipping sparkling water and reviewing a dense stack of regulatory documents on her tablet. At 42, Naomi was a woman who commanded respect through quiet competence rather than loud demands. She was dressed comfortably for the impending 7-hour red-eye to London Heathrow and understated. Charcoal Loro Piana, cashmere set designer loafers, and a pristine leather tote bag that held more confidential federal data than most corporate servers. Naomi was exhausted. Her week had been a relentless grind of high-level meetings, compliance audits, and legal briefings. All she wanted was to board the Boeing 777-300ER sink into the lie-flat bed of Seat 2A and sleep halfway across the Atlantic Ocean. She had paid for her first-class ticket out of her own pocket, a rare personal indulgence before a high-stakes government conference in the United Kingdom. When the boarding announcement for first-class and top-tier frequent flyers echoed through the lounge, Naomi packed her belongings and made her way down the jet bridge. The familiar sterile scent of aviation fuel and conditioned air greeted her as she stepped onto the aircraft. Waiting at the aircraft door was Vivian Montgomery, the flight's senior purser. Vivian was a veteran of the skies, a woman in her late 50s with a perfectly lacquered blonde bob, a sharply pressed Navy uniform, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She possessed a specific brand of corporate authority that she frequently wielded like a blunt instrument. As Naomi approached the entrance offering a polite nod, Vivian's practiced smile vanished. Before Naomi could even place her foot fully inside the cabin, Vivian took a subtle but deliberate half-step forward, physically blocking the narrow entryway. "Excuse me," Vivian said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet condescension. "Main cabin and economy boarding hasn't commenced yet. You'll need to step back into the jet bridge and wait for your zone to be called." Naomi paused, her expression neutral. She was the only passenger currently at the door. "I'm in first class, Seat 2A. Vivian's eyes darted over Naomi, performing a rapid, dismissive visual calculus. She took in the comfortable knit outfit, the lack of flashy jewelry, and most notably the color of Naomi's skin. The purser's posture stiffened. "I find that highly unlikely. May I see your boarding pass?" Naomi internally sighed. She was no stranger to this. It was a familiar, exhausting dance, the invisible boundary lines drawn by people who had already decided where she belonged. Without a word, she pulled up the digital boarding pass on her phone and held it up. Vivian didn't just look at it. She reached out and physically pulled Naomi's phone closer, squinting at the bright screen as if trying to decode a forgery. Naomi Harper. Vivian read aloud, her tone laced with skepticism. She tapped the screen, scrolling up and down. "Is this a staff travel ticket, an employee buddy pass?" "No," Naomi replied, her voice remaining perfectly level. "It's a fully paid revenue ticket. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to get to my seat." Vivian handed the phone back slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We've had issues with the app generating incorrect seating assignments lately. I'll need to see your passport to verify your identity against the passenger manifest." This was highly irregular. Boarding passes were scanned at the gate. Flight attendants at the door did not conduct secondary passport verifications unless there was a glaring security discrepancy. The passengers boarding behind Naomi were now beginning to bottleneck in the jet bridge. "The gate agent just verified my passport," Naomi stated calmly, locking eyes with Vivian. "Is there a specific security protocol requiring a secondary check at the aircraft door for first-class passengers today?" The use of industry-standard phrasing caused a brief flicker of hesitation in Vivian's eyes, but her pride quickly overrode her caution. I'm the senior purser on this aircraft, and it is my job to ensure everyone is in their correct cabin. Passport, please." Deciding to play the long game, Naomi retrieved her navy blue official passport, though she kept the federal insignia concealed within its leather cover, and handed it over. Vivian flipped it open, scrutinized the photo, looked at Naomi, and then looked back at the photo. Finding absolutely no discrepancy, she practically shoved the booklet back into Naomi's hands. "Seat 2A is on the left." Vivian snapped, offering no apology for the delay. Thank you, Vivian," Naomi said smoothly, making a point to read the woman's name tag aloud. She walked to her seat, effortlessly stowed her leather tote under the ottoman, and settled in. She took out her tablet and, instead of opening her work documents, opened a blank note file. Date, Flight 884, JFK to LHR, Senior Purser Vivian Montgomery, unwarranted secondary identification check at boarding door, clear display of racial profiling. Naomi wasn't just a passenger taking notes for a customer service complaint. She was observing. And in her line of work, observation was the first step to dismantling a deeply flawed system. She decided right then that she would give Vivian enough rope to hang herself. 10 minutes later, the first-class cabin was mostly full. The ambiance was hushed, filled with the soft clinking of glassware, as a junior flight attendant offered pre-departure champagne. Naomi declined the alcohol, requesting sparkling water with a lime instead. Just as the boarding process seemed to be winding down, a commotion occurred near the front galley. A red-faced, breathless white man in his late 50s stormed onto the plane, hauling a massive, overloaded garment bag. He was dressed in a rumpled designer suit and wore an expression of profound irritation. "I don't care what the gate agent said, T-Ba." The man barked loudly, loud enough for the entire front cabin to hear. "I'm a Platinum Medallion member and my assistant booked me a first-class seat. I'm not sitting in premium economy for 7 hours." Vivian practically materialized at the man's side, her demeanor instantly transforming from the icy gatekeeper she had been with Naomi into a fawning, overly accommodating servant. "Sir, please lower your voice. Let's look at your boarding pass." Naomi watched the interaction from the corner of her eye. The man, whose name was Lucas Pendleton, shoved a paper ticket into Vivian's hand. "Mr. Pendleton," Vivian cooed, reading the name. "It appears your original flight was canceled, and you were rebooked onto this one at the last minute. Unfortunately, first class checked in full." "That is unacceptable," Lucas demanded, crossing his arms. "I have a board meeting in London tomorrow morning. Someone needs to be moved. You people always hold a seat for emergencies." Vivian looked around the cabin. Her eyes scanned the businessman reading the Wall Street Journal, the elderly wealthy couple sipping champagne, and finally landed on Naomi. A terrifyingly cold, calculated light flickered in Vivian's eyes. "Please wait right here, Mr. Pendleton," Vivian whispered loudly enough to be heard. "Let me see what I can do to correct this ticketing error." Naomi knew what was coming before Vivian even took her first step down the aisle. She smoothly closed her tablet, resting her hands calmly on her lap, and waited. Vivian stopped beside seat 2A, looking down her nose at Naomi. "Miss Harper," she said, her voice dropping the saccharine tone and adopting one of stern authority. "I need you to gather your belongings. There's been a ticketing error regarding your seat." "A ticketing error?" Naomi asked, her voice perfectly serene. "That's strange. I booked this seat 3 weeks ago. I have my receipt, my seat selection confirmation, and I've already been cleared by the gate agent." "Yes, well, systems fail," Vivian replied smoothly, already reaching up toward the overhead bin where Naomi had placed her coat. "We have a VIP passenger who requires this seat. I've secured you a very nice aisle seat in the main cabin, row 34. I'll even ensure you get complimentary drinks for the inconvenience." Naomi didn't move. "Vivian, I am not moving to row 34. I paid for seat 2A. I am sitting in seat 2A. If Mr. Pendleton's assistant failed to secure him a first-class ticket, that is an issue between him, his assistant, and your ticketing desk. It has nothing to do with me." Vivian's face flushed red, a stark contrast to her pale complexion. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone she had already deemed beneath her. She leaned in closer, invading Naomi's personal space, attempting to use physical intimidation. "You do not dictate how I run my cabin," Vivian hissed, her voice rising in volume, clearly intending to make a scene. "I am politely asking you to relocate. If you refuse, I will consider you an unruly passenger. And let me assure you, I have zero tolerance for aggressive behavior on my flights." Aggressive. It was the ultimate weaponized word. The dog whistle used to paint a calm, rational black woman as a threat. Naomi felt a surge of cold fury, but she kept her face completely impassive. She knew the power of maintaining absolute composure. Across the aisle, a passenger named David O'Connor, a young tech executive traveling for business, lowered his noise-canceling headphones. He looked appalled. "Excuse me," David spoke up, his brow furrowed. "She hasn't been aggressive at all. She's just sitting there. You're the one raising your voice, lady." Vivian whirled around, pointing a manicured finger at David. "Sir, this does not concern you. Interfere again, and you will be disembarking with her." David blinked, stunned by the sheer hostility, but he held his ground, pulling out his smartphone and quietly hitting record. Vivian turned her attention back to Naomi. "I'm giving you one final warning. Gather your bags and move to economy, or I will call the captain, halt this boarding process, and have airport security drag you off this plane." Naomi looked at Vivian. She didn't look angry. She looked almost pitying. "Vivian, I strongly suggest you think very carefully about your next move. You are violating several federal carriage regulations, and you are entirely in the wrong. Walk away. Tell Mr. Pendleton he has to sit in the seat he was ticketed for. Do not escalate this." "Are you threatening me?" Vivian gasped, clutching her pearls in a display of theatrical victimhood. "You are threatening a crew member. That's a federal offense." "I am stating a fact," Naomi replied evenly. "That's it," Vivian shouted, turning on her heel and marching furiously toward the front of the aircraft. "I'm calling ground security. You are done." Lucas Pendleton looked on with a smug grin, clearly pleased that the problem was being handled so he could get his comfortable seat. Naomi simply picked up her tablet, reopened her note file, and began typing rapidly. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had grown incredibly tense. The other passengers were whispering, casting sympathetic but nervous glances at Naomi. "Hey," David whispered from across the aisle, "I got all of that on video. If they try to kick you off, I'll back you up." "Thank you, David," Naomi said, offering him a small, genuine smile. "I appreciate that. But I promise you, I am not the one getting off this plane today." 5 minutes passed. The flow of passengers from the jet bridge had completely stopped. Outside the window, the tarmac was slick with rain, reflecting the flashing lights of the baggage carts. The heavy footsteps echoing down the jet bridge signaled the arrival of Vivian's reinforcements. Vivian marched back into the cabin, leading the charge. Behind her was Brenda, a deeply stressed-looking gate agent clutching an iPad, and 2 burly Port Authority police officers in full tactical gear. The sight of armed police boarding an aircraft instantly changed the oxygen in the room. Conversations died. People shrunk into their seats. "There she is," Vivian declared, pointing dramatically at Naomi as if she had just identified an international fugitive. "She is refusing crew instructions, verbally threatening me, and creating an unsafe environment for the rest of the passengers. I want her removed now." The 2 officers, Officer Miller and Officer Davis, looked at Naomi. They expected to see a belligerent, screaming passenger. Instead, they saw a deeply composed woman in designer cashmere, calmly looking back at them. Brenda, the gate agent, stepped forward, looking entirely uncomfortable. She checked her iPad. "Miss Harper, I'm sorry, but if the flight crew deems you a disruption, we have to ask you to deplane. We can refund your ticket and put you on a flight tomorrow." "Brenda," Naomi said, addressing the gate agent, directly ignoring Vivian entirely. "Can you please verify my seat assignment on your manifest?" Brenda hesitated, looking at Vivian, who glared at her. Brenda looked down at her screen. You are confirmed in seat 2A, Miss Harper. And can you tell me who is confirmed in seat 34B? Brenda tapped the screen. That seat is unassigned. It's empty. So Naomi summarized, her voice ringing clear in the silent cabin. "There is no ticketing error. Your purser is attempting to forcefully downgrade a paying first-class passenger to accommodate a standby passenger simply because she prefers his demographic over mine. When I refused her illegal downgrade, she fabricated a security threat to have armed police remove me." Officer Miller. The older of the two cops frowned. He looked at Vivian. "Ma'am, is this a ticketing dispute or a security issue because we don't do evictions for overbooking?" "It is a security issue," Vivian shrieked, losing her veneer of professional calm. "She is hostile. She threatened me. The captain has given me full authority to secure this cabin. If you don't remove her, this plane is not pushing back from the gate." Lucas Pendleton chimed in from the galley. "Just drag her out of here for God's sake. Some of us have places to be." Officer Davis placed a hand on his duty belt and stepped closer to Naomi. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to grab your things and step off the aircraft. We can sort this out at the gate, but you cannot stay on this plane if the crew refuses to fly with you." Naomi took a deep breath. She had given the airline every opportunity to correct the situation. She had given Vivian the chance to walk away. The time for observation was over. "Officers," Naomi said, her tone suddenly shifting. The polite passenger was gone. Her voice now carried the unmistakable cadence of absolute unyielding authority. "I am not moving, and I strongly advise you not to touch me or my property unless you want your precinct captain dealing with a federal civil rights lawsuit before midnight." Vivian laughed a harsh, mocking sound. "Oh, she's a lawyer. How terrifying. Arrest her." Naomi didn't look at Vivian. She reached into her Loro Piana tote bag and pulled out a sleek government-issued satellite phone. It wasn't an iPhone. It was thick, black, and secure. "Who are you calling?" Vivian sneered. "Customer service." "The wait time is 3 hours. They can't help you, honey. The doors are closing." Naomi ignored her. She hit a single speed dial button. The call connected instantly, bypassing standard cellular networks. "Command center, this is Jenkins." A sharp male voice answered on the other end, clearly audible in the quiet cabin. "Jenkins, this is Harper," Naomi said. "Authentication code Delta Niner Sierra 7 Echo." There was a brief pause on the line. "Authentication verified. Go ahead, Director Harper." Vivian's mocking smile faltered slightly. The gate agent Brenda suddenly looked like she might be sick. "I need an immediate, indefinite ground stop placed on Transglobal Airlines Flight 884 out of JFK. Naomi ordered, her voice clipped and professional. "Tail number November 732 Tango Golf." "Copy that, Director. State reason for the hold." Title 14, Code of Federal Regulations. Part 252 violation coupled with an active Title 49 civil rights breach by the senior flight crew. Furthermore, initiate an immediate lock on the flight dispatch system. This aircraft is not clear for pushback until I have the chief pilot, the JFK station manager, and a federal investigator on board. Understood, Director. Ground stop is active. Dispatch lock engaged. Notifying JFK Tower now. Thank you, Jenkins. Naomi hung up the phone and placed it carefully on her tray table. Vivian scoffed, though it sounded incredibly forced. She looked at the police officers. What kind of theatrical stunt is this arrester she's faking a phone call? Before Officer Miller could respond, the cabin intercom crackled to life. It was the heavy, confused voice of Captain Richard Hayes. Ladies and gentlemen from the flight deck, this is your captain. We seem to have hit a bit of a snag. I've just been notified by JFK Air Traffic Control that a federal ground stop has been placed specifically on our aircraft. Our dispatch clearance has been completely revoked by the Department of Transportation. I have no idea what's going on, but we are holding at the gate indefinitely while we figure this out. The silence in the first-class cabin was deafening. Every single eye slowly turned from the PA speakers above down to the black woman sitting calmly in seat 2A. Naomi slowly reached into her tote bag one last time. She pulled out a solid brass credentials wallet, flipped it open, and placed it on the armrest. The heavy silver badge inside caught the cabin lights, flanked by a rigid federal ID card. It read, Naomi Harper, Senior Director, Aviation Consumer Protection Division and Civil Rights Enforcement, United States Department of Transportation. Naomi finally looked up at Vivian, whose face had drained of all color, resembling a sheet of wet parchment. "As I was saying, Vivian," Naomi said softly, the silence in the cabin amplifying every syllable. "I'm exactly where I belong. But you, on the other hand, are about to have a very, very bad night." Total and absolute silence consumed the front of the aircraft. For several agonizing seconds, the only sounds were the rhythmic drumming of rain against the fuselage and the soft, erratic whistling of Vivian Montgomery taking sharp, panicked breaths. Officer Miller, the veteran Port Authority cop, was the first to break the paralysis. He holstered his thumbs into his duty belt, leaned down, and peered closely at the leather and brass wallet resting on the armrest. He read the embossed text, looked at the federal seal, and then read the name. His eyes widened a fraction of an inch. He slowly stood up and took 2 distinct, deliberate steps backward, distancing himself from both Vivian and the immediate vicinity of Seat 2A. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice completely stripped of its previous authoritative edge, replaced by a cautious, respectful drone. "Are you the director of the DOT's Civil Rights Division?" I am," Naomi stated calmly, leaving the badge exactly where it was. "And as of 3 minutes ago, I'm officially opening an active federal investigation into Transglobal Airlines regarding a suspected violation of Title 49, Section 41,310, which prohibits discrimination in air transportation. This aircraft is now considered an active incident scene." Vivian let out a noise that sounded like a strangled gasp. That's fake. It has to be fake. She bought it on the internet. You can't ground a plane. I have seniority." Officer Davis, the younger cop, looked at Vivian as if she had lost her mind. "Lady, she bypassed the control tower and triggered a federal lock on your dispatch. You think she bought that on Amazon? We are stepping back. This is above our pay grade." Before Vivian could stammer another defense, the cockpit door swung open with a violent click. Captain Richard Hayes marched out. He was a tall, imposing man with graying temples, and right now his face was flushed with the kind of stress only a pilot who had just lost control of his multi-million-dollar aircraft could understand. He carried a printed telex message ripped straight from the cockpit's ACARS system. "What in God's name is happening back here?" Captain Hayes demanded, waving the paper. "I just got a direct message from Atlanta Dispatch. The DOT has placed a hard hold on my tail number. They said I need to speak to a Director Harper." "That would be me, Captain Hayes," Naomi said, raising her hand slightly. Captain Hayes looked at Naomi, then at the badge, then at the armed police, and finally at his senior purser, who was currently trembling violently. The seasoned pilot instantly deduced the geometry of the disaster. He let out a long, exhausted sigh, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Director Harper." Hayes said, his tone professional but strained. "Can you please explain to me why my flight, which has 340 passengers on board and is currently burning expensive auxiliary power, has been federally grounded?" "Certainly, Captain," Naomi replied, her voice echoing clearly in the silent cabin. "Your senior purser, Vivian Montgomery, attempted to forcefully downgrade me from my confirmed fully paid first-class seat. When I inquired about the ticketing discrepancy, she refused to provide one. When I pointed out that a white male standby passenger, Mr. Pendleton, was being given my seat without cause, she escalated the situation. She fabricated a claim of aggression, explicitly threatened me with removal, and called Port Authority to forcefully drag me off your aircraft." Captain Hayes turned to Vivian, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Vivian, is this true?" "No, I mean yes, I asked her to move, but it was a ticketing error." Vivian stammered, her voice pitching an octave higher. She pointed a shaking finger at Brenda, the gate agent, who was trying to merge into the galley wall. Brenda said it was an overbook. Brenda flinched as every eye turned to her. "I never said that, Captain." Brenda squeaked, her voice trembling, but determined to save her own job. "I checked the manifest when Vivian demanded it. Director Harper is confirmed in 2A. Seat 34B is empty. Vivian ordered me to print a new boarding pass for Mr. Pendleton and told me she would handle the woman in 2A. Captain Hayes's jaw clenched so hard it looked like his teeth might shatter. The cardinal rule of aviation was safety. The second was avoiding catastrophic PR and regulatory nightmares. Vivian had just handed him a cocktail of both. Lucas Pendleton, who had been hovering near the galley watching the chaos unfold, suddenly realized that his comfortable ride to London was evaporating. His arrogance swiftly morphed into irritation directed at the very woman who had tried to help him. "This is ridiculous," Lucas barked, stepping forward. "I have a board meeting in London. If she has the badge, let her keep the seat. Put me somewhere else or put me on another airline, but get this plane in the air." Naomi turned her gaze to Lucas. "Mr. Pendleton, you are a Platinum Medallion member, correct?" Lucas puffed out his chest instinctively. "Yes, I am. I fly over 100,000 miles a year with Transglobal." "Then you are well aware of the upgrade priority and standby procedures," Naomi said coldly. "You knew you were not confirmed in this cabin. You stood there and watched a crew member attempt to illegally evict a paying passenger to accommodate your tantrum, and you cheered for my arrest. Your complicity is noted." Lucas's face went pale. He opened his mouth to argue, but Officer Miller stepped between him and Naomi, putting a firm hand on Lucas's chest. "Step back, sir. Do not interfere with a federal official." Captain Hayes looked at his watch. "Director Harper, what do you need to release my aircraft?" I am waiting for your station manager and a federal investigator," Naomi replied. "Until they arrive, nobody gets off this plane and nobody gets on. If Vivian so much as moves toward the cockpit or attempts to alter the flight manifest on the terminal, I will have Port Authority detain her for evidence tampering." Vivian collapsed into the jump seat by the main door, burying her face in her hands. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down upon her. This wasn't a scared tourist she could bully. This was the apex predator of aviation regulation, and Vivian had just locked herself in a cage with her. 20 agonizing minutes later, the flashing lights of an airport operations vehicle illuminated the rain-streaked windows of the Boeing 777. The main cabin door opened, letting in a gust of cold, damp air. 2 men rushed onto the jet bridge and stepped onto the aircraft. The first was William Bradford, the JFK station manager for Transglobal Airlines. He was a man in his late 40s whose tie was askew and whose forehead was beaded with sweat despite the chill. Behind him was a tall, sharp-eyed man in a dark trench coat, Special Agent Thomas Reed, a regional DOT inspector who had been dispatched from the federal offices across the airport. "Where is she?" Bradford gasped, out of breath from sprinting through the terminal. Captain Hayes pointed to Seat 2A. Bradford and Agent Reed quickly made their way down the aisle. "Director Harper," Agent Reed said, flashing his own credentials. "Agent Reed, Field Operations. We received your lock order. The regional administrator is on standby." "Thank you, Agent Reed," Naomi said, finally placing her badge back into her tote bag. "Mr. Bradford, I assume you've been briefed." William Bradford looked like he wanted the floor of the aircraft to open up and swallow him whole. Transglobal Airlines was already under a microscope. Just 3 months prior, they had been fined nearly $2 million by the DOT for extreme tarmac delays and mishandling passenger rights. Another civil rights violation, especially one perpetrated against the DOT's own Director of Civil Rights, was the kind of extinction-level event that got CEOs fired and airline operating certificates reviewed. "Director Harper, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am." Bradford began, his voice dripping with desperate appeasement. "This is an egregious misunderstanding. We will refund your ticket, offer you unlimited travel vouchers, and immediately look into—" "Stop right there, Mr. Bradford!" Naomi interrupted, her voice snapping like a whip. "Do not insult my intelligence by calling this a misunderstanding. This was a targeted, racially motivated eviction. Your purser weaponized security protocols to bypass federal carriage laws. I am not looking for vouchers. I'm looking for accountability." Agent Reed turned to Vivian, who was still huddled on the jump seat. "Ms. Montgomery, you are the senior purser on this flight." Vivian stood up, her legs visibly shaking. Her perfectly styled hair had begun to frizz, and her makeup looked distinctly worn. "Yes, but you have to listen to me." She was screaming. She threatened my job. She was aggressive. She created a hostile environment. I felt unsafe. As the purser, I have the right to refuse service to anyone who threatens the safety of the crew. It was a desperate, calculated lie. Vivian was clinging to the union rulebook, hoping that the subjective claim of feeling unsafe would shield her from termination. It was a tactic that had worked for thousands of flight attendants in the past when dealing with legitimate passenger disputes. "Is that so?" Agent Reed asked, pulling a notepad from his coat. She was screaming and aggressive. "Yes, uncontrollably." Vivian insisted, finding a shred of false confidence. "Ask Brenda, ask the other passengers." She refused to comply with federal crew instructions. From across the aisle, David O'Connor, the young tech executive, cleared his throat. He had been sitting quietly the entire time, his smartphone resting on his tray table. "Actually," David said loudly, drawing the attention of the entire investigative party, "that's complete bullshit." Vivian whipped her head around, glaring at David. "Sir, stay out of this." "No, I don't think I will," David replied smoothly. He looked at Agent Reed. "I've been sitting here since boarding began. Director Harper never raised her voice. She never swore. She never made a single threatening movement. The only person who was screaming, acting unhinged, and creating a hostile environment was her." He pointed directly at Vivian. William Bradford looked at David, desperate for a lifeline, but terrified of the answer. "Sir, with all due respect, it becomes a he said, she said situation." "Not really." David smiled, picking up his phone. "I'm a software developer. I know how things get twisted. As soon as she told Director Harper to move, I started recording. I have the last 12 minutes in 4K resolution capturing the entire interaction. Audio is crystal clear." The color rapidly drained from Vivian's face once again. Her knees buckled slightly and she had to lean against the galley counter for support. The ultimate nightmare for any abusive employee had manifested, a high-definition recording of their misconduct. "Mr. O'Connor, is it?" Agent Reed said, his eyes lighting up. "Could you airdrop that to my device? That would be immensely helpful." "Happily," David said, tapping his screen. A chime echoed from Agent Reed's phone a second later. Reed Bradford and Captain Hayes huddled together watching the screen. The video played. Vivian's saccharine, condescending tone at the door, her sudden shift to hostility, her lie about the ticketing error, her demand that Naomi move to row 34, Naomi's calm, measured refusal, and finally, Vivian's unhinged threat to call the police, followed by her shouting, "Arrest her!" When the video finished, William Bradford closed his eyes and let out a shuddering breath. It was worse than he had imagined. It was a textbook, indefensible civil rights violation captured on film. Lucas Pendleton, sensing that the ship was not only sinking, but entirely on fire, decided to save himself. He marched up to Bradford. "Look, I want no part of this," Lucas declared, raising his hands in surrender. "My assistant screwed up my ticket. I asked the flight attendant if there was anything she could do. She told me she had a problem passenger up front she was going to clear out for me. I didn't know she was going to illegally boot someone. I thought it was just an overbook." Vivian gasped, staring at Lucas in abject betrayal. "You coward! You told me to drag her out of here." "I have a business to run," Lucas shot back. "I'm not going down for your racist power trip." Agent Reed snapped his notebook shut. He looked at Vivian, his expression completely devoid of sympathy. "Ms. Montgomery, you lied to a federal inspector, you filed a false security report to local law enforcement, and you flagrantly violated Title 49. I am recommending an immediate enforcement action against your operating license." William Bradford turned to Vivian. The station manager no longer looked terrified. He looked furious. The liability this woman had just placed on his shoulders was astronomical. "Vivian," Bradford said, his voice dropping to a harsh, cold whisper. "Go to the crew rest area. Pack your personal belongings. Do not speak to any passengers. Do not touch any aircraft equipment." "William, please," Vivian begged, tears finally spilling over her mascara. "I have 30 years with this company. My pension, my union rep." "Your union rep won't touch this with a 10-foot pole once they see that video," Bradford interrupted. You are suspended indefinitely without pay pending formal termination. Get your things, now." Tension evaporated into a strange, heavy silence as Vivian Montgomery turned and walked toward the crew closet. The bravado she had wielded like a weapon just 30 minutes prior was entirely shattered. Her hands trembled as she pulled her rolling suitcase from the compartment, her movements slow and defeated. Officer Miller and Officer Davis, who had been standing by quietly, after realizing their services were not required for the passenger, stepped forward. "Mr. Bradford," Officer Miller said, glancing at the sobbing former purser. "Do you want her escorted off the premises?" Bradford nodded grimly. "Yes, confiscate her airport SIDA badge and her company ID. Escort her out through the terminal and ensure she gets into a taxi. She is no longer permitted in secure areas of this airport." Vivian zipped her bag, her shoulders slumped. She turned to face the first-class cabin one last time. She didn't look at Naomi. She couldn't. She kept her eyes glued to the floor. "Let's go, ma'am," Officer Davis said, placing a firm but professional hand on her shoulder. As Vivian walked down the aisle toward the main door, flanked by the very armed police officers she had summoned to humiliate another woman, the absolute irony of the situation hung in the air. The passengers in first class, many of whom had watched her reign of terror, remained completely silent. There were no cheers, no clapping, just the profound, chilling weight of instantaneous karma. As she stepped off the aircraft and into the jet bridge, Vivian Montgomery's 30-year career officially evaporated into the rainy New York night. With Vivian gone, William Bradford turned his attention to the remaining problem, Lucas Pendleton. "Ah, that's you, Mr. Pendleton." Bradford said, his tone devoid of any customer service warmth. "As I understand it, your ticket is unconfirmed for this cabin. Seat 34B in the economy cabin is still available. You can either take that seat, or I can have Brenda rebook you for a flight tomorrow." Lucas stared at Bradford, utterly appalled. "I am a Platinum Medallion member. You cannot stick me in a middle seat by the bathrooms." "Actually, sir, I can," Bradford replied smoothly. "Given your involvement in the disturbance that just delayed this flight by 40 minutes, I highly recommend you take the seat before I decide you are also a liability to the safety of this crew and deny you boarding entirely." Lucas opened his mouth to argue, but he caught the icy glare of Captain Hayes, who was standing with his arms crossed, silently daring the businessman to push his luck. Defeated Lucas grabbed his massive garment bag. "This airline is a joke," Lucas muttered bitterly, dragging his heavy bag down the aisle past the spacious first-class seats and disappearing behind the curtain into the cramped confines of economy row 34. Bradford finally turned to Naomi. He looked exhausted, resembling a man who had just defused a bomb with 1 second left on the timer. "Director Harper," Bradford said respectfully. "The offending crew member has been removed from the premises. A replacement purser is sprinting down the concourse as we speak and should be here in 2 minutes. The passenger who instigated the seating conflict has been relocated. I will be personally filing the incident report with the DOT in the morning." Naomi nodded slowly. She picked up her satellite phone from the tray table. "Agent Reed, are you satisfied with the initial evidence collection?" "Yes," Director Reed replied. "I have the video passenger statements and the crew manifest. We have more than enough to proceed with the inquiry." "Excellent," Naomi said. She dialed the speed dial button again. "Command Center Jenkins," the voice answered promptly. "Jenkins, it's Harper. The situation has been resolved. Lift the ground stop on Transglobal Flight 884. Release the dispatch lock and notify JFK Tower that they are clear for pushback." "Copy that, Director. Ground stop lifted. Have a safe flight." Naomi hung up the phone and slipped it back into her Loro Piana tote bag. She looked at William Bradford and Captain Hayes. "Gentlemen, thank you for your prompt handling of the situation. Let's get this aircraft to London." Captain Hayes let out a visible breath of relief. "Thank you, Director. I apologize again for the conduct of my crew." He turned and marched back to the cockpit, eager to close the door and finally get his plane in the air. William Bradford and Agent Reed bid their farewells and exited the aircraft. 2 minutes later, a young, slightly breathless flight attendant rushed onto the plane, looking terrified but incredibly polite. She quickly introduced herself to the cabin and began the safety briefing. As the Boeing 777 finally pushed back from the gate, its massive engines whining to life, David O'Connor leaned across the aisle. "Hey," David whispered, a grin spreading across his face. "That was without a doubt the most incredible thing I have ever witnessed. You didn't even raise your voice." Naomi Harper offered him a genuine warm smile, settling back into the plush leather of Seat 2A. "True power, David," Naomi said softly, opening her tablet to finally review her regulatory documents, "never has to shout." Cruising at 35,000 feet over the pitch-black Atlantic Ocean, the cabin of Flight 884 was finally enveloped in the serene tranquility that a first-class ticket promised. Naomi Harper had reclined her seat into a fully flat bed, the soft glow of her reading light illuminating the thick stack of policy documents she was supposed to be reviewing. Yet for the first time in her meticulously organized life, her mind was not on the upcoming summit in London. It was anchored entirely to the tarmac back at JFK. Naomi knew the aviation industry better than almost anyone in the federal government. She understood that the incident with Vivian Montgomery was not an isolated anomaly. It was a symptom of a deeply entrenched culture of unchecked authority among certain legacy airline crews. The sky was a unique jurisdiction. Once those aircraft doors closed, the captain and the purser became the absolute law for decades. The phrase, "interfering with a flight crew," had been weaponized to silence legitimate passenger complaints, covering up everything from poor service to blatant racial discrimination. She opened a secure encrypted messaging app on her government-issued phone. Despite the late hour, she knew her team in Washington, D.C. would be awake, mobilizing the initial phases of the investigation. She typed out a concise directive to her deputy director, a sharp-minded lawyer named Jonathan Pierce. "Pierce, I want a full historical audit of TransGlobal's passenger removal logs for the past 5 years. Cross-reference all disruptive passenger ejections with the racial and ethnic demographics of the removed individuals. I suspect Ms. Montgomery has done this before, and I want a pattern of practice established before I land." As Naomi finally closed her eyes to sleep, a very different kind of storm was brewing back in New York. Vivian Montgomery sat in the cramped, sterile kitchen of her Queens apartment nursing a glass of cheap Chardonnay. Her phone lay on the table, vibrating with texts from confused colleagues who had heard rumors of her dramatic removal. She ignored them all. Instead, anger was rapidly replacing her initial panic. In Vivian's mind, she was not the villain. She was the victim of a tyrannical, power-hungry government bureaucrat who had pulled rank to ruin her life. She refused to accept that her 30-year career was over. By 3 a.m., Vivian was on the phone with Richard Buchanan, a high-profile employment lawyer known for taking on sensationalist cases and arguing them in the court of public opinion rather than actual courtrooms. "She set me up, Richard." Vivian sobbed into the receiver, pacing her linoleum floor. "This woman, this diversity hire at the DOT, she flashed a badge and held an entire plane hostage just because I politely asked her to accommodate a ticketing error. I was terrified. She threatened me. TransGlobal threw me under the bus to appease the federal government." Buchanan, seeing dollar signs and cable news appearances flashing before his eyes, immediately took the bait. "Vivian, this is wrongful termination and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We are going to sue TransGlobal for breach of contract, and we are going to sue Naomi Harper personally for abuse of power. But first, we need to get your story out there before the airline controls the narrative." By the time Naomi's flight touched down at London Heathrow the next morning, the twisted, fabricated version of the story had already hit the internet. Richard Buchanan had released a scathing press statement to a sympathetic, right-leaning online news outlet. The headline was designed for maximum outrage. "Veteran flight attendant fired after federal agent hijacks flight over seating dispute." The article painted Naomi as an aggressive, entitled government elitist who had terrified a dedicated flight crew and forced an airline to bend to her will. Vivian was quoted extensively claiming she suffered from PTSD after the hostile interrogation on the aircraft. Buchanan announced a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against both the DOT and Transglobal Airlines. When Naomi stepped out of customs in London, her phone immediately began to detonate with notifications. The story was trending. Comment sections were filling with vitriol aimed at corrupt federal agents and DEI bureaucrats. Jonathan Pierce called her the second she got into her waiting town car. "Naomi, have you seen the news?" "I'm reading it now, Jonathan." Naomi said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Ms. Montgomery is doubling down. It's a PR nightmare, boss. The Secretary of Transportation's office just called. They want a briefing in an hour. Buchanan is going on a primetime cable show tonight to demand you be stripped of your badge and fired. What do you want us to do?" Naomi looked out the window at the gray London sky. She felt a profound sense of pity for Vivian. The flight attendant was so accustomed to controlling the narrative that she had entirely forgotten the cardinal rule of the modern age: there is always a camera. "Do nothing, Jonathan," Naomi instructed calmly. "Let her talk. Let her lawyer threaten us. Let them build the tallest pedestal they possibly can." "Are you sure they're dragging your name through the mud?" "I am entirely sure." "Have you secured the evidence file from Agent Reed?" "Yes. We have the station manager's report, the gate agent's sworn testimony, and the 4K video from the passenger in 2C. "Good. Lock it in the federal vault. Do not leak it. Do not release it to the press. We are going to let Vivian Montgomery and her lawyer walk right into a perjury trap of their own making." For 48 hours, Vivian Montgomery was the darling of the outrage machine. She appeared on 2 major cable news networks, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue recounting the horror of being bullied by Naomi Harper. She set up a GoFundMe for her legal expenses, which quickly amassed over $50,000 from sympathetic viewers who believed her manufactured tale of victimhood. Lucas Pendleton, watching the news from his hotel room in London, breathed a sigh of relief. His name hadn't been mentioned in any of the broadcasts. He assumed he had dodged a massive bullet and went about his business meetings entirely oblivious to the sword dangling over his head. But the internet is an ecosystem of chaotic justice, and it only takes one person to shatter a carefully constructed lie. David O'Connor had spent the last 2 days at a tech conference in Silicon Valley. He hadn't been paying attention to the news cycle. It wasn't until a colleague forwarded him the viral article about the abusive dot director that David realized what was happening. He sat in his hotel room watching Vivian cry on national television, his jaw practically hitting the floor. "You have got to be kidding me," David muttered. David didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call the news. He opened his laptop, logged into X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok, and uploaded the raw, unedited 12-minute 4K video he had recorded from Seat 2C. He captioned it simply, "I was on Transglobal Flight 884. Here is the actual truth about Vivian Montgomery and director Naomi Harper. Watch who the real aggressor is." Within an hour, the algorithm caught the video. Within 3 hours, it had 1 million views. By midnight, it had crossed 20 million. The high-definition footage was utterly damning. It stripped away every single lie Vivian had peddled to the media. The world watched in crystal-clear audio as Vivian aggressively targeted a calm, polite black woman. They heard her lie about a ticketing error. They watched her try to force Naomi into economy. They heard Naomi's measured professional warnings, and most devastatingly, they watched Vivian completely lose her temper, screaming for armed police to arrest a passenger who was simply sitting quietly in the seat she had paid for. The backlash was instantaneous, catastrophic, and deeply unforgiving. The court of public opinion, which had elevated Vivian just hours before, completely reversed course and crushed her with the weight of a freight train. The GoFundMe platform froze her legal defense account, citing fraudulent misrepresentation. Richard Buchanan, realizing his client had lied to him and handed him a public relations disaster, formally dropped her as a client via a 2-sentence press release. But the internet sleuths weren't finished with Vivian. They turned their collective gaze toward the background of the video. "Who is the guy in the suit cheering for her to be arrested?" someone commented. Within 4 hours, the collective power of social media facial recognition had identified Lucas Pendleton. They found his LinkedIn profile. He was the chief operations officer of a massive publicly traded logistics firm based in Chicago. The hard karma hit Lucas with ruthless efficiency. His company's social media pages were flooded with thousands of angry comments demanding his removal. Boycotts were trending. By the time Lucas woke up in his London hotel room the next morning, he had 14 missed calls from his company's board of directors. When he finally called them back, the chairman of the board didn't mince words. "Lucas, you are trending #1 worldwide for attempting to steal a black woman's first-class seat and cheering for her false arrest. The stock has dropped 3% in pre-market trading. Your resignation letter needs to be on my desk in 10 minutes, or you are fired for violating our corporate morality clause. You forfeit your severance." Lucas collapsed onto the edge of his hotel bed, staring at the wall in stunned silence. His entire career, his reputation, and millions in stock options gone in an instant. All because he felt entitled to a seat that wasn't his. Meanwhile, Vivian's life was unraveling at a terrifying speed. The union, which usually fought tooth and nail for flight attendants, reviewed the video and immediately withdrew all support. Transglobal Airlines, desperate to save their own reputation, officially terminated her employment for gross misconduct, a specific legal designation that effectively nullified her 30-year pension. She was bankrupt, unemployable, and internationally despised. The lie she had thought would save her had become the exact instrument of her total destruction. 2 weeks later, the chaotic viral storm had finally settled, transitioning into the slow grinding and utterly merciless gears of federal bureaucracy. Inside the grand wood-paneled hearing room of the Department of Transportation headquarters in Washington, D.C., the air was thick with palpable tension. Naomi Harper sat at the center of a long mahogany table, the Great Seal of the United States, gleaming in polished brass on the wall behind her. She wore a sharp-tailored navy blue blazer, her posture immaculate, her expression completely unreadable. Flanking her were her Deputy Director Jonathan Pierce and a team of federal investigators. Seated across from her at the witness table was William Bradford, the JFK station manager, and the terrified-looking CEO of Transglobal Airlines, a man named Thomas Harrington. Behind them sat a phalanx of high-priced corporate attorneys, all of whom looked distinctly nauseous. They were sweating under the harsh fluorescent lights, fully aware that they possessed absolutely zero leverage in this room. Naomi slowly opened the thick red-tabbed file resting in front of her. "Chambray." "Gentlemen," Naomi began, her voice echoing with chilling clarity through the silent room. "The investigation into Transglobal Airlines Flight 884 is complete. The findings are frankly abhorrent, and they extend far beyond the actions of a single rogue employee." She looked directly into the eyes of the CEO. "My team, led by Deputy Director Pierce, audited your passenger removal and seat reassignment logs for the past 60 months across all domestic and international hubs. We found a statistically impossible anomaly. Passengers of color were 400% more likely to be downgraded, relocated, or entirely removed from first-class and business-class cabins under the vague guise of ticketing errors or crew interference compared to their white counterparts." Thomas Harrington swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his expensive silk tie. "Director Harper, please believe me when I say we take these findings incredibly seriously. I was sickened by the video. We have formally terminated Ms. Montgomery. We have severed our corporate logistics contracts with Mr. Pendleton's firm, and we are currently hiring a top-tier diversity consulting firm to implement mandatory company-wide bias training. Training is wholly insufficient, Mr. Harrington." Naomi interrupted, her tone polite, but laced with unbreakable administrative steel. "A corporate culture that systematically protects bigotry and empowers employees to weaponize security protocols cannot be simply trained away. A diversity consultant is nothing more than a public relations bandage applied to a deep systemic infection. This culture must be dismantled through severe financial and operational consequence. Naomi slid a single heavy stock sheet of paper across the polished mahogany table. Under the authority of Title 49, Section 41,310 of the United States Code, I am issuing a formal non-negotiable consent order. Transglobal Airlines will pay a civil penalty of $50 million for egregious and sustained civil rights violations. Furthermore, your airline will be placed under a strict 3-year federal probationary audit managed directly by my office. The lead corporate attorney practically choked, leaning forward to read the document. Harrington's face drained of color. Under this probationary period, Naomi continued ignoring the attorney's panic. Any passenger removed from an aircraft by a crew member will require an immediate sworn legal affidavit from the commanding pilot detailing the exact provable cause of the removal. That affidavit must be submitted directly to my compliance division within 24 hours of the incident. If you refuse to sign these terms today, I will immediately recommend that the FAA suspend Transglobal's carrier operating certificate pending a full congressional inquiry. Harrington stared blankly at the paper. $50 million was one of the largest consumer protection fines ever levied against a commercial airline in modern history. It would obliterate their quarterly profit margins, tank their stock price, and absolutely infuriate their board of shareholders. But he knew the terrifying reality the 4K video was permanently etched into the public consciousness. The entire world was on Naomi's side. If Transglobal fought this in a public court, the legal discovery process would expose the damning 5-year audit logs to the press, and the resulting brand damage would be fatal. With a visibly trembling hand, Harrington picked up a gold fountain pen, uncapped it, and signed his name on the consent decree, sealing his airline's expensive fate. "Thank you, gentlemen," Naomi said smoothly, standing up and gathering her files with practiced grace. "I expect the wire transfer to clear the Treasury Department accounts by the end of the business week. This administrative hearing is officially adjourned." As Naomi walked out of the hearing room and into the bustling marble hallway, Jonathan Pierce fell into step beside her. He was beaming, practically vibrating with triumphant energy. $50 million, boss, Jonathan whispered in awe. "You didn't just break the glass ceiling today. You shattered the entire fuselage. Legacy Airlines are going to be absolutely terrified to illegally bounce anyone ever again." "Bob, fear is a highly effective regulator. Jonathan," Naomi replied, a faint, genuinely satisfied smile finally touching her lips. "Let's get back to work." 6 months later, Naomi Harper found herself walking down another enclosed jet bridge, this time at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. She was heading to a critical aviation summit in Tokyo. She wore a simple, elegant camel hair trench coat and carried the exact same immaculate leather tote bag. As she stepped onto the pristine Boeing 787 Dreamliner, the cabin environment felt entirely different. The senior purser, a sharp, impeccably groomed young man named Michael, greeted her warmly at the boarding door. He glanced down at his digital passenger manifest, and his eyes widened slightly as he recognized the name and the face of the woman standing before him. Every flight attendant in the country knew exactly who Naomi Harper was. "Welcome aboard, Director Harper," Michael said, his voice imbued with the utmost respect, professionalism, and genuine courtesy. "It is an absolute honor to have you flying with us today. You are right this way in seat 1A. If there is anything, absolutely anything you need to make your 14-hour journey more comfortable, please let me know immediately." "Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that," Naomi said softly. She walked to her spacious suite at the front of the aircraft, effortlessly stowed her bag, and sat down. She didn't have to show her federal passport. Nobody demanded to scrutinize her boarding pass twice. Nobody questioned her right to occupy the luxurious space she had rightfully earned. She opened her tablet, taking a quiet moment to look around the hushed, orderly cabin. The crew was moving with quiet efficiency. The system was for this flight at least working exactly as it was designed to work. Naomi Harper took a slow sip of her complimentary sparkling water, leaned back against the plush headrest, and smiled as the heavy aircraft doors sealed shut. True power never had to shout, scream, or throw a tantrum. It just had to be willing to ground the plane. If you found this incredible story of justice, resilience, and instant karma satisfying, please hit that like button and share this video with anyone who loves seeing unchecked arrogance get exactly what it deserves. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell for more thrilling real-life stories of power, consequence, and ultimate revenge. Have you ever witnessed a power-tripping employee or a highly entitled passenger get put in their place? Let us know all about your experiences in the comments section down below. We love reading your stories. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.